of the things that has been a great concern of mine in looking at the issue of sustainable development is that essentially carrots in the form of money or tax incentives are often held out to people in order to entice them into getting on board with the programs. If people really understood what these things were up front, they wouldn't necessarily want to jump on board, but somehow the money or the tax incentive makes it more attractive for them, and they will often close their eyes to all of the strings that are attached to that money or the tax incentives and plow forward just for the money. And I see this in particular in relationship to the Working Lands Initiative, which is a law that was passed here in Wisconsin in 2009 under the Doyle administration. And the Walker administration has continued to further the Working Lands Initiative, and there were quite a number of monies set aside in this last biennial budget to further the programs associated. For example, there's something called the Farmland Preservation Agreement, which individual property owners, agricultural producers will enter into. It is a 15-year minimum agreement with the state. It's entered into through the Department of Agricultural Trade and Consumer Protections, or DATCAP. And essentially what it does is gives the government the ability to determine what you can and can't do on your property for at least 15 years, and then the agreement is renewable if you choose to renew it. For cash-strapped farmers, it's very attractive because you're getting incentives, monetary incentives, to enter into that agreement. However, since DATCAP is now in control of what you can and can't do on your property, that means that if you, for example, want to sell, pieces of your property, if you want to do something other than is specified in the agreement, you're essentially out of luck. You can get out of these agreements, but the conversion fees to get out of the agreement are very, very steep. So again, for somebody who's potentially cash-strapped, it's not so easy to do. Also, there are something called conservation easements, which these can be entered into in lots of ways, but the state of Wisconsin actually is one of the biggest purveyors of these agreements. And there was quite a bit of money set aside in the last biennial budget for these conservation purchases, conservation easement purchases. Essentially what's being done is that taxpayer money is being used to purchase conservation easements from property owners. This separates the development rights from the real property. When you separate those development rights from the real property, in perpetuity, by the way, this is not a temporary agreement, it's not a limited agreement, it's a permanent agreement that you enter into, and it lasts not just for your lifetime but forever in relationship to that property. When you separate the development rights from the real property, you lower the property value, because nobody is going to want property that they can't do anything with. And that's essentially what these agreements specify, is that the state now has the ability to tell you what you can and can't do on your property. For example, if you have a barn that is now decrepit and you need to tear that barn down and build a new one, the agreement may allow you to tear down the old barn, but you won't be able to build a new barn. You may not be able to cut trees on your property. You may not be able to cut grasses, certain grasses on your property. Suddenly there are a whole range of things you cannot do. You won't be able to sell land in the amounts that you want to sell it, or at the times you want to sell it. You won't be able to perhaps have certain kinds of businesses on that property, or develop it in other ways that might be valuable to you. Now somebody else owns the development rights, and you are permanently out of luck. The more land that is owned by the state, the more taxpayers have to shoulder that burden of maintaining that land, and the less revenue can be coming in to the state's coffers to help pay for, the services and et cetera that we need. So it's really quite an insidious thing how private property is being eliminated through a state program.